Hi, everyone. Here we're going to be talking about the World Wide Web. Topics. So we're going to be covering an overview of the World Wide Web, the central components of the web, the LAMP stack of technologies that are used to deploy web pages and web documents, the client-server model that is conceptualized to structure the web, and the URLs, uniform resource locators, which are the specific addresses of web pages. So imagine it's mid-1980s and you are working for the US Census Bureau in some of the computers there, and you are working with documents. You create documents, data, maybe there's text, there's description of activities. There's also records of numerical records of how experiments have turned out, or the counts of people in different states. And you know that you are working on some documents, and then your colleague over here, she's also working on some other documents, and then the other person here is working on other documents. And sometimes you need to see what they're working on. You need to retrieve their information. But even though at this time, these computers often had internet, and you were able to, for example, you can send an email and you shoot an email to somebody, or they can call you and ask you to send an email, or you can call them and ask them to send an email with a certain document. There was no way for this person here sitting to just start browsing the documents that this person was working on. Moreover, when you did send documents from one person to another, it was not always clear what specific piece of information in the document, how it was related to content in some other document elsewhere, in the computer of somebody next to you, or in the computer of another person, or in the computer of somebody else's office. So the computers were connected via the internet. They were able to process documents digitally, but there was no easy and open environment for accessing the documents of others and linking these documents to other documents and to descriptions or other relevant references. And so this one person came up with this information management proposal of the 1990s. And the idea is, this is maybe a little overly complex graphic, but it's the graphic from the original document. So I like to share it here. But the idea is that you have all these entities. The entity is kind of like just a document, you know, a set of descriptions, a written document, maybe data about census information, people living in different areas of the country. And the idea is that one document could refer to another set of documents, or could have information about who wrote it, and this other person be referenced here. And it could also be linked to maybe some other server or computer where it was stored, and so on. So this linked system of documents that can be accessed by any one computer is essentially the plan for the World Wide Web as we know it. And it was developed by this individual here, pretty much single-handedly, Tim Berners-Lee, in the late 1980s, and really sort of became out there in the 1990s. And the main components were essentially the URL, which is the specific address of a particular document. And I use the term document very broadly. So this can be a Word document, a spreadsheet document, or even an application with like instructions and computer programs to do some actions. The HTML, which is the structure of the document, or you can kind of call data structure, or information structure, document structure, that an application can read and understand. As you know, we can't just open any one kind of file with any program. Excel spreadsheet opens spreadsheet files. Microsoft Word opens Word documents, and so on. And then, so there needed to be a specific kind of way to structure the document for this new developed system. And then the HTTP, which is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is the method of communication and data transfer. How is the document going to be transferred? Now, there used to be something like already developed called FTP, File Transfer Protocol, which we are still using today. And in this file transfer protocol, you can transfer files. So the technology to transfer files was already there. What was missing was a system to link documents to each other and an environment to openly access these linked documents. And so the other component too is the web browser, which was also developed by Tim Berners-Lee along with these other specifications. And eventually others develop other web browsers like Mosaic that led to then the popular browser Netscape. And this is when I started using the internet. So probably like around our early 2000s. And here is the Large Hadron Collider that is being developed at CERN, which is the institution where Tim Berners-Lee was working and from which he developed the concept of the World Wide Web. Now, the World Wide Web was not sure if that was a term back then, but the term was pretty early on adopted, but essentially consisted of these central pieces of technology. So let's take a look and explain here how these components come together so we can then talk about the specific definitions. So we have a web browser. The web browser was part of the inventions. The web browser is the application or software program to retrieve web documents. And this can be, once again, you have text, numbers, data, or even applications. Web browser. The web browser installed on a computer with an operating system like Windows or Unix or Linux or Macintosh OS. The computer is connected to the internet. So this is an internet service provider. The internet allows the connection to other computers that host applications, that host documents. These computers that host documents are called servers. The one that accesses is called a client. This is an abstract classification. They're both just computers the same way. They're just computers the same way fundamentally. And in the server computer, there has to be something like an Apache, which is the web hosting software. So this is the server side. We need a software to host and enable the browser to understand the call from the internet to provide the documents, the web pages that are available and stored in the server. So when you open a web browser on your computer and you type in the URL for the web page, what you're doing is called HTTP request. It's a web request. It's a web page request over the HTTP protocol initiated by the browser. That's the browser function. The browser knows how to make HTTP requests for web pages. And once you write out the URL, hit enter, your computer connects to the internet, connects to the server, connects to the web hosting, identifies the web document that you searched for, which was identified in the URL, and then retrieves the document, and the document then appears on your own computer. And that's essentially how the web works. So let's talk about some of these main components a little bit more deeply. The HTTP protocol, the HTML, the web browser, the URL, and the web server software or the server application to host web documents. So components of the web. A web server is a computer that runs the web server software. An example is Apache, to store web pages and respond to requests from web browsers. We already have this installed for us in our server. We already took care of that. Web browser are the client applications named as such because they make requests to the server for a website or web page. So these examples are Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, the Internet Explorer, and there are others as well. A website is a collection of web pages, which are files structured around HTML, and sometimes they're also applications. Once again, they're all documents, very broadly stated. It can be a file, image, text, numbers, applications, videos, and so on. A web page is a document or application that is stored as a file or a combination of files on a web server. It may provide static content or be an interactive web-based application, just kind of emphasizing that point there. Once again, just explaining the different components as we talked about over here. Now where's my the web server itself, the server computer, the web hosting software application, the web document itself, the browser, the client computer is just any computer with a browser essentially. What else? HTML. HTML is the hypertext markup language. It's a set of tags in a way that gives documents a structure that can be read and interpreted by the web browser. Web pages and applications can also be written and include other languages that browsers nowadays and software have developed and been updated to also interpret and process. So like videos and complex, like what Java applications that do all sorts of different things, update automatically and so on. So it's come a long way since the early 1990s. Each web page is identified via a uniform resource locator, which is the exact specific address of the web page document, containing the IP address of the web server and the name of the document itself. It's a fairly straightforward and kind of simple concept, but it became very, very relevant, very widely used, of course. The World Wide Web, usually referred to as the web, is the protocol for accessing web pages and the set of web pages accessible via this protocol and a web browser. Sometimes the web browser seems very unassuming, very simple, almost like blank program, but the web browser is very powerful and it is kind of an open environment, if you think about it, because it's an open environment. You can connect to any web page around. So it's different than like closed off applications that you see very commonly on mobile phones nowadays. So it's an open environment of accessing web pages and web documents. The LAMP stack. So let's talk a little bit about the server side applications to actually put this infrastructure together. So to host the websites and web pages that other people can then open up and connect to, some software programs are necessary. The LAMP stack is a traditional combination of these software programs, and it's an acronym for Linux, which is the operating system often used, Apache, the web server software, MySQL, the database management system, because often the web pages are connected to a database system that structures a more refined piece of data, and PHP, a programming language to turn pages into functional applications. So if you're just kind of representing simple text, you can simply use HTML. But then if you're going to run an application, you need more sophisticated programming language like PHP. So on the client side here, with the side that accesses the web pages, you don't really need to have any of this. You kind of don't need this. You don't need to really worry much about this, although it can be a little bit more complex. But essentially, you have the web browser. Now, Firefox is just one web browser. There are others. And the web browser does the request for a web page. Now, for the request to a web page to be successful, you're going to need to have an operating system. So often it's Linux-based operating system installed on the server, and we have that in our case for this course. We also need the web server software. Now we also happen to have Apache as well installed. This has to be all installed in the server with the PHP, and we also have that, but we may not get to PHP in this course. And we also have the DB database server, such as MySQL. MySQL is one example of a database server, and they're all installed in the same server, in the same computer, so they can communicate with each other. And all of these together are able to host the applications, the simple ones and the more complex ones as well. So client server requests. In the HTTP request, the URL is translated to the IP address via the domain name system. And we talked about this when we talked about IP address and domain name system. But browsers can understand the IP address as well. So once you use, this is the address bar of a web browser. And if you can see here, what we have is the server, computer, and then the location. Actually, this is the user, and then the location of the documents, the name of the documents and the location of the documents. Now we could have something like www.myhomepage.com/html/index and so on, but it's the same, right? One just gets translated to the other. And just to, once again, just talk about the client server model. So you see this term very often, client server model. So it's just the reference of the model of the web and other kind of similar technologies where a computer is considered a client. It makes requests and it can run on many platforms. Makes requests. So you can have any browser, and that's the beauty of it too. You can have a Sapphire browser, you can have a Chrome browser, Firefox, a Microsoft Edge, Microsoft Internet Explorer, Netscape, and so on, installed on any, it can be Mac OS, can be Windows, and so on, can be Android. And then, because they can make the HTTP request, so they make the HTTP request to the computer that's hosting the web pages. And all these documents hosting on the web page, the beauty of it too, all the web pages, remember, because of the hyperlink, because of the URL itself, these documents can refer to information on other documents. Refer to documents in other servers, information in other servers, right? And that's just the whole idea of the hyperlink. The hyperlink refers to content on other sites. And this is a linked system. So the web is obviously a linked system. Distributed hypertext system is kind of maybe our older terminology, distributed and linked. So let's talk a little bit about the URLs. So every web page or document or application and so on has a unique URL. Most URLs begin with HTTP to indicate the web's standard communications protocol. The www part used to be necessary, but rarely anymore. So it's kind of an old relic. Now, the file name of a specific web page always appears last in the URL. And you can see this is kind of just the same as a structure of a file directory system on an operating system. So you have the web protocol at first. So just making sure that the computer is clear. This is a web connection. We're using this form of communication. This is the web server name, which is the web server name, the name of the computer itself that it's being connected to. And remember, the computer itself gets translated to IP address, but of course, CNN.com is much easier to remember than 141.28.739 and so on. So this is where the domain name system comes in. And now the slash and is just folders. These are just folders named folder within the computer server, just like you have folders in your computer. And then the last thing is going to be the file name and the extension or the type of file. And these can be .html or these can be .php, which is in the PHP, written in the PHP language, and so on. And this is the actual name of the last document or application itself. Now we should mention about HTTPS. So HTTPS is a relatively new standard that is more secure because it encrypts the data as it travels over the internet. And you notice this on your browser. And now the browsers often include this little lock to ensure that it's HTTPS, S for secure, and encrypted. Now, sometimes you see something without HTTPS, and so it's just HTTP. This means that the information is not encrypted. Now, other things depend too. For example, if you have a VPN on, or maybe it doesn't really matter because you're just dealing with public content anyway, so you don't really need secure connection. Not all sites provide it, but if it's simply a public site, it's not necessarily problematic. HTTP and HTTPS are not the exact same connection. An address with one may not lead to the same place as an address with the other. Oh yeah, so recall that if the address is HTTP, then if you do HTTPS, it may not work. So you might need to like remove the S or add the S to make the connection. Sometimes the change is made automatically, but sometimes it's not. Also note that you can send commands in the request, the HTTP request. You can add a command in the URL itself for the computer. So when you, let's say you do a search, you're on CNN site and you do a search, use the search box, and you're just looking for sports content and you hit enter. Once you hit enter, what's going to happen is your browser is going to send this word here because you're typing on your own browser, you're typing on your client computer. So the browser has to send that information. Once you hit enter, it sends the information to the server. So to send that information, you can see it on the URL itself. Now, not always you can see it, but it's always sending the information, and sometimes you can see it. So the information is sent on the HTTP request itself, and you can see here, this means search, question mark, because this is the text field or attribute, and then sports. So the sport is the word we typed up. Text is the command that the CNN page itself figured out to structure this. Every page is different. Some pages have a different term that they're going to include. And then this, let's go back to our web server here. You make the request for the search request, text equals sports, which is what you type. And then this request goes back to the web server. The web server itself processes the query, looks for all the documents where the text includes sports, and then sends back to us the documents all related to sports. So this is the kind of communication that is happening when you're connected to a web page and when you're hitting enter and going back and forth with the content of a web page. Some basic rules for URLs and some tips for security. A URL never contains spaces. If you add a space, then the computer thinks it's not a URL, you're just typing some other content. The HTTP can be omitted unless there is a difference within HTTPS. So the browser is always going to make HTTP requests. So sometimes you can just omit it. Always use a // so it's / and not / on the URL address. Duplicate the URL's capitalization exactly. Some web servers are case sensitive. So if the site says CNN.com, it's big, but if it says CNN, then it should be small. Sometimes they can interpret both, but sometimes not. The last point here is that note that not every hyperlink takes you to the URL desired or may contain extra information in commands like we just saw. So be careful. And also sometimes a hyperlink will be hidden as we're going to be working with. So you might just say, click here. Click here, underlines, and you know it's a link. But if you check the link, and you can do that by right-clicking, or maybe check to see where if you hover over with your mouse, sometimes you can see the browser, the link here. You can also always right-click on the link and check for the link information, the detailed information of the web page or the specific link. And you can see the link that it's going to. And you often got to check this because the site may be taking you to a dubious link. It could be a malware, it can be a problematic thing, or it could be advertisements, spyware, and so on. So you got to be careful the links you click, because what you see at first sight may not be actually what you think you're going to. So that's it for this one, and I'll see you next time.